Hello and welcome to TG Talk, where we talk to the generation about reaching the world for Christ. Hello, I'm Bobby Bosler, and I'm delighted to be with you once again to continue our study through Paul's confinement in Philippians chapter 1. Just to catch you up, as we've been studying throughout our study, Paul was confined. And yet in his confinement there, he was in jail. He was declaring the gospel where he was, taking every opportunity God gave him. That was inspiring other people to preach the gospel. And Paul walks us through his grappling. He knew what God was calling him to do, to preach the gospel to a very influential person, the emperor. And he didn't know if that would result in his death or if that would result in him, Caesar, getting saved. He just didn't know, but his desire was to obey Jesus, to follow Jesus, regardless of what it did to him. He believed that God would have him survive because there were people that still needed him on this earth, and his desire was that his readers, the Philippians, would take the very same approach that he had, that they would give their lives for the gospel, preach the gospel, not be ashamed, but to declare with boldness that Jesus saves. And so that being said, as we get to verse 28, Paul is anticipating what I'm going to call the backlash. Because he knew that if the Philippians were going to take their holy obligation before God seriously, and if they were going to stand together and preach the gospel in dependence on Jesus, people were going to get saved. And people were going to get mad. And so that's why, as we look at verse 28, Paul says, "And in nothing terrified by your adversaries, which is to them an evident token of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that of God." Now, as we examine this verse, there's a couple things we need to note. Paul's desire was that as the Philippians gave it everything they had to reach the world for the gospel, he knew there was going to be a backlash, and he wanted them to be prepared for it. Now, young people, I just want to say to you that as you give it everything you've got in Christ's strength and in Christ's power to preach the gospel in your confinement, you are going to have a backlash as well. I'm just telling you, it's going to happen. It could happen in a number of different ways. It could be an individual getting mad at you. It could be a spiritual attack, just a feeling of oppression. It could be a bunch of seemingly random things going wrong in your life. That happens when you're on the front line of the gospel. Trust me, I've seen it many times. I could tell you stories, but I won't, because I'm trying to keep this short here today. And Paul's, his counsel, his advice to them was, listen, don't be terrified. And he gives us two reasons why. Reason number one, he says this backlash is an evident token of their perdition. Now, we don't use the word perdition. The idea of that word is their doom, their destruction. In other words, the very fact that they're lashing out against the good news should be a sign to you that they need the good news. In other words, they're already condemned, on their way to hell. It's a sign they need the gospel. In other words, it's a sign you are on the right track. And really what this sign ought to do for us is it ought to cause us not to be angry at them, not to be frustrated and rah at them, but it ought to draw out a heart of compassion. They're fighting against their cure. And we need to be compassionate in response. Secondly, here he says, but to you, this is an evident token of salvation, and that of God. In other words, the very backlash is a God-intended sign for you that you're on the right track. And you know, young people, again, there's a lot that I could say here, but as you look forward and as you press forward, and even I'm going to be sharing here very soon some real concrete ways that all of us can be involved in preaching the gospel. I'm very excited. Very, very, very excited about what I've got planned and what I believe the Lord has planned for us. But as we pursue this, just be prepared for a counterattack. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be scared of it. The counterattack itself is a sign from God that these people need Jesus and that we're on the right track. You know, the pursuit of total surrender and total dependence is not won without its battles. And yet, in the midst of those battles, we do not need to be afraid because God is on our side. There's a world that needs to be reached. And hey, I'm excited. You know, young person, if you enjoyed this video, I want to encourage you, like it. Yes, please subscribe and all of that stuff. Hit the bell and all of that. But more than this, can you get on your face before God and tell him, God, bring it on. Bring on the battle. I'm fine. I'm fine. I've got a stomach for the battle. I'm depending on you, and I know that in you I am more than a conqueror. Spend some time with the Lord, asking him to prepare your heart for the battle, because listen, the battle is the Lord's. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.